Okay, we have been given the all clear to start. Our presiding judge can go ahead and take it away.
All right. Good morning, everybody. My name's Paul Hubble, and I'll be the presiding judge today. We got the all clear to start, so let's call the case of Stevie Rogers versus Drew Mars. Scoring judges, please look to the two buttons on the lower left of your screen and remember to keep your audio and video muted unless the bailiff tells you otherwise. You should all have your video set to hide all non-video participants. This means the only people on the screen right now should be the advocates and me. Can the attorneys please make appearances before the court?
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Abigail LaFontaine, plaintiff. I'm joined today with my co-counsel, Colin McDougall.
Good morning, Your Honor.
And we are joined at the bench today by Stevie Rogers, the plaintiff in this case.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning. Okay, defense.
Good morning from Central Time and from wherever you're joining us, Your Honor. My name is Brandon Cooper, and I'm joined by my co-counsel, Mr. Raul Garcia. And together we will be representing the defendant, Mr. Drew Mars.
Good morning, Your Honor. I believe I was muted. My apologies.
Morning as well.
Great. Thank you. Okay.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff has some pretrial matters.
Okay, go ahead with those.
Thank you, Your Honor. The plaintiff requests that Rules 603 and 615 be enacted for the constructed swearing in and sequestration of all witnesses in today's trial.
Okay.
And that is barring party representatives, which for the plaintiff is Miss Stevie Rogers. She will join us at the bench.
Very good. Defense, do you have a party representative?
Yes, Your Honor. Drew Mars, the defendant.
Very good.
Your Honor, the plaintiff would like to ask your preferences in addressing Your Honor and the scoring judges as the jury for statements.
In doing what?
Addressing Your Honor or the scoring judges as the jury for statements.
I think just talking to the camera for us right now. I think that's a decision I'll leave up to the advocates. So.
And then your preferences for sharing our screen to highlight exhibits. Should we ask your permission first?
I don't think that's necessary. Just, kind of state for the record what you're doing and use the technology as you see fit.
Thank you, Your Honor. And finally, we would like to state for the record that exhibits 1 through 7 have been pre-admitted into evidence for today's trial.
Okay.
And finally, we would just like to confirm that Your Honor has access to the rule book, the Midlands Rules of Evidence, and pretrial matters.
Let me make sure. I think I do, but let me make sure. I do. Yep.
With that, Your Honor, the plaintiff is ready to proceed.
Very good. Okay. Defense, any pretrial matters?
Yes, Your Honor, just briefly. Whenever we make an objection and if it is sustained, should we motion to strike the testimony in question or should we assume it's already been stricken?
I'm going to leave that up to the attorneys to decide. I mean, that kind of depends on what type of objection and what type of testimony it is. So I'll let you decide that.
Yes, Your Honor. And with that, the defense is ready to proceed.
Okay, very good. Before we get into opening statements, everyone should make sure that they are in speaker view. That's the button in the upper right of your screen. Attorneys, please remember to mute your audio when the other attorney is speaking. Okay, so I'll be in speaker view. Opening statements.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. Motive and opportunity. These are the only two things that one requires in order to take action. And these two most fundamental pieces of the case, what we, the plaintiff, will bring to light throughout today's trial: motive and opportunity. Today's case is about the death and last will and testament of Agatha Lee. Ladies and gentlemen, the picture you see on screen right now is of Miss Agatha Lee. Agatha Lee was a renowned American mystery author. Her one novel, Death in a Bottle, was published in 1968 to rave reviews. Since then, Miss Lee led a private life, and she lived with her caretaker, Drew Mars, in Midlands. Agatha Lee was a sweet 82-year-old woman who unfortunately lost most of her family to a tragic accident. You will hear today that the only family Miss Agatha Lee had left is the plaintiff in this case, Stevie Rogers. Miss Rogers is Agatha's granddaughter, and you will hear about how close their relationship was leading up to Agatha Lee's death. You will also hear that Agatha Lee planned, in August of 2018, to revise her will to include Stevie Rogers in the inheritance. See, since February of 2018, Drew Mars was to be the only heir to Agatha Lee's estate, but that was about to change. You will learn that Agatha Lee had set up a meeting with her attorney on August 17th. But Miss Lee died just 3 days before this meeting. She died from a known allergic reaction to a heartburn medication called chlorandramine. As the plaintiff in today's case, we represent Stevie Rogers, Miss Agatha Lee's granddaughter. The plaintiff will show today that Drew Mars, Miss Lee's caretaker, knowingly caused the death of Agatha Lee on August 14th of 2018. And therefore, for today's case, Drew Mars is not eligible to receive their inheritance. Ladies and gentlemen, to knowingly cause the death of someone means that Drew Mars took action knowing it would cause Agatha Lee's death. As the plaintiff, we hold a burden of proof, and we will therefore prove that Drew Mars's ineligibility is ineligible by a preponderance of the evidence. This means that throughout today's trial, the plaintiff will show that it is more likely than not that Drew Mars knowingly caused Agatha Lee's death. Now, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, please don't get bogged down by the legal jargon here. Take it from the judge and myself as counsel. Today, you are here to determine whether or not Drew Mars had a hand in Agatha Lee's death. In order to prove that Drew Mars had both the motive and the opportunity to act, we will call two witnesses. You first hear from Stevie Rogers herself. Miss Rogers will testify that she arrived at her grandmother's home on July 4th of 2018 and spent the next several weeks with Agatha. You will hear that Miss Rogers spent most of every day with her grandmother, playing backgammon and chatting over meals. Miss Rogers will testify that as of August 4th, the day Agatha died, Agatha Lee was intending to change her will to include Stevie Rogers in the inheritance. You will hear that Drew Mars was standing just outside the door where this conversation took place. Finally, Miss Rogers will explain how she saw Drew Mars entering Agatha's bedroom on the night of August 14th, just before Agatha went to bed. Next, you will hear from Mr. Maverick Bond, the private investigator hired by Miss Rogers to look into Agatha's death. Mr. Bond will explain that he helped in the initial police investigation which took place immediately after Agatha Lee's death. Mr. Bond will testify that he found an email explaining that Drew Mars knew that he was the current heir to Agatha's estate. Mr. Bond will then testify to finding a black bag of the same chlorandramine pills in Drew Mars's closet just after Agatha died. Motive and opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, the plaintiff will show that Drew Mars had both a motive and plenty of opportunity to knowingly cause Agatha Lee's death. At the end of today's trial, my co-counsel, Colin MacDougald, will come before you in closing argument, and he will explain that the plaintiff has proven that Drew Mars is ineligible to receive his inheritance because he had a hand in Agatha Lee's death. Thank you.
Opening from the defense, Your Honor.
Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Members of the jury, opposing counsel just came before you and told you a story. It was filled with all of the facts that they want you to know in today's case. But the story the state just told you, it isn't the whole story. So let me tell you the rest. Well, what if I were to tell you that in today's case, there was somebody else who had the motive and the opportunity? Or what if there was someone else who needed the money, who was living in the victim's home, somebody else who knew about the victim's allergy, and someone who had access to her bedroom on the night that she passed? That someone, members of the jury, is the plaintiff, Stevie Rogers. But there is one important difference between the plaintiff, Stevie Rogers, and Drew Mars. You see, Drew Mars's name was actually on that will, and the plaintiff's was not. Folks, that's why we're here today. It may have sounded like it from opposing counsel's opening statement just now, that you're here for a murder trial. That is not the case. This is not a criminal trial. We're not trying to send anybody to jail. What you're here to determine today is whether or not it was Drew Mars who killed Miss Lee, and because of that, this case is about money. Whether or not Drew Mars would receive the inheritance that Miss Lee had left, or whether Stevie Rogers would get it. Now, there are many ways to make a will invalid. But today you're going to hear about something called the Slayer Statute. And what that rule says is that if someone is responsible for a person's death, they cannot inherit anything from that will. You're going to hear today that the plaintiff knew that. The plaintiff knew that if Miss Lee, the victim, were to die, and they could convince a jury that it was Drew Mars who had done it, the plaintiff would get everything. The house, the car, millions of dollars in cash. Members of the jury, the plaintiff knew what the will said, and he knew how to stop it. You see, there's a reason why Drew Mars's name was on that will and not the plaintiff's. You're going to hear today about the relationship between Miss Lee and Stevie Rogers. And you're going to hear that their relationship, they weren't really close. That for years, Stevie Rogers never called her, had never written to her, had never visited her. But when his money began to run out, that's when he decided it was time to go see their grandmother. But when they went to visit their grandmother, well, that's when they learned what the will said. Stevie Rogers learned that he was not on that will and would not inherit anything. but Stevie Rogers also knew how to stop it. You're going to hear today that it was Stevie Rogers who framed the death of Miss Lee so that the police could point their finger at Drew Mars. You're going to hear today that Stevie Rogers knew about her allergy. Stevie Rogers knew where they could find the drug. Stevie Rogers had access to her room. And when the police had found out that she died, the first person he accused was Drew Mars. Members of the jury, throughout today's case, I want you to consider who had the motive, who had the opportunity. Because today you're going to hear that Drew Mars was actually doing quite well. He had an $80,000 a year salary, had savings. But you're going to hear that Stevie Rogers, they only had $2,000 in cash. And when the plaintiff found out that he wasn't going to be on that will, he knew how to stop it. He framed Drew Mars for murder. And throughout today's case, that's exactly what we're going to show you today. And at the end of today's case, my co-counsel, Mr. Brandon Cooper, is going to come before you. And he's going to tell you about the evidence that we heard. He's going to tell you that it was Stevie Rogers who knew what the will said. And he knew how to stop it, members of the jury. Thank you.
All right, thank you, counsel. All right, before the plaintiff calls its first witness, I'm going to ask everyone to switch to gallery view. That button is in the upper right of your screen. This will allow you to see the attorneys and the witnesses at the same time. So everyone, let's move to gallery view. And I'm pretty sure we're supposed to score as we go. So I'll give you a second there to fill out your ballot or to do your ballot. And I'll do mine as well. Okay. All right. Plaintiff, call your first witness.
Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Stevie Rogers to the stand.
Good morning.
May I proceed?
Yes, you may.
Good morning. Please state your name for the court.
My name is Stevie Rogers.
Miss Rogers, who is Agatha Lee to you?
Well, Agatha Lee is, or rather was, my grandmother and my only relative.
Why are you appearing in court today?
Because I'm the rightful heir to my grandmother's estate. I want to show that Drew Mars was responsible for her death.
Do you know how Agatha Lee died?
Yes, she died from a fatal allergic reaction to a heartburn medication called chlorandramine on August 14th. I was living with her at the time.
Your Honor, we're placing Exhibit 1, which is already in evidence, on the sharing screen.
Very good.
Miss Rogers, is this Agatha?
Yes, that's definitely her. I could never forget my Nana.
Please, briefly tell us about your grandmother.
Well, there's so much to tell. She was a strong and fiercely independent woman. When her book got really famous, Death in a Bottle, she became really private.
Your Honor, at this time, we're removing Exhibit 1 from the screen. When you were young, Miss Rogers, how was your relationship with Agatha?
Oh, it was wonderful. In the afternoons, we used to play backgammon all the time. She always used to say I was the only one who could beat her. We would sometimes take her black poodle, Muffy, to the dog park, and when it got too hot, we'd fill ice cubes up with birdseed and watch the squirrels run around on her back porch.
Before July of 2018, when did you last see Agatha?
Well, I hadn't seen her face to face since around 2011, but I did definitely call. I remember I wanted to wish her happy 80th birthday in 2017.
Miss Rogers, why did you go so long without seeing each other?
To put it shortly, I had a really rough decade. I know it's a horrible excuse, but it's the truth.
What happened, Miss Rogers?
Well, in 2008, my parents had died in a car crash. My mental health had just plummeted. I wasn't sure what to do, so self-admitted into rehab in 2017. I'm much better now. I've been following my therapist's advice and I've been trying to reconnect with my loved ones.
So how did you end up with your grandmother on the day that she died?
Well, she had sent me a letter saying that she loved me, but she was taking me out of her will, which I realized was hard for her to do. I don't blame her. I had been a sorry excuse for a granddaughter, and I realized that I needed to get better and reconnect with her.
Are you familiar with your grandmother's current will?
Yes, I am.
Your Honor, permission to put Exhibit 9 constructively on screen to be entered into evidence.
Yes.
Ms. Rogers, what is this?
Well, that looks like an exact copy of my grandmother's will.
Is it fair and accurate to when you last saw it?
It looks fair and accurate to me, yes.
Ms. Rogers, when did you last see this will?
Well, I've been seeing it in circulation, but the first time I actually saw this will was, I think, August 20th, when Kirby Doolittle, Nana's lawyer, read it out in front of everybody.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff offers Exhibit 9 into evidence.
Without objection.
Okay, Exhibit 9 will be in evidence.
For the record, we're removing Exhibit 9 from the screen. Ms. Rogers, did you ever end up going to see Agatha?
Yes, I finally made my way down to see her on July 4th, but I will admit I had to find her first.
What do you mean that you had to find her?
Well, she moved sometime during the time we didn't see each other, and I never got her new address. I know I certainly couldn't look her up on Google. She was far too private for that. So I hired a private eye so I could find her while still maintaining her privacy.
Now, why did you go see Agatha on July 4th?
Well, that was the 10th anniversary of my parents' death, and I really needed to be with my family that day. And I know she probably needed me too.
Was anyone else staying at Lee Manor when you arrived?
Yes, Drew Mars was there.
Who is Drew Mars?
Well, in short, Drew Mars is Nana's caretaker.
Did you ever interact with Drew?
Not particularly. Every week they asked me how long I was planning to stay, and that was about all the conversation we had. I know Mars had spent a lot of time with Nana, but after I arrived, I showed them what true family looked like.
So, Miss Rogers, how did the next few weeks go?
It was just like old times. Everything was wonderful. Nana and I played backgammon again, and we kept taking her dog, Little Lady, out on walks.
Leading up to August 14th, to your knowledge, Miss Rogers, how was Agatha's health?
Oh, she was spry and happy, actually pretty active. Like I said, we would always go on walks, and she had weekly biographer appointments with Ryan Cabrera. It would either be at her house or at some fun restaurant she found.
Now, Miss Rogers, let's talk about August 14th, 2018 specifically. Did you and Agatha spend time together on the day she died?
Of course we did.
What did you do?
Well, I remember early that morning, I was making breakfast for her. She always loved black coffee and grapefruit. And then I brought it up to the study to talk to her.
Do you recall talking about anything specifically?
Yes. My Nana told me she was going to put me back in the will. And she told me she was making an appointment with Kirby Doolittle, her lawyer, later that week.
Miss Rogers, after breakfast, how did your day continue?
Well, right after Nana told me about the changes, we went to the door because she had a biography appointment. And when we opened the door, we saw Drew Mars leaning their head against the door frame. It looked as if they were listening.
Now, Miss Rogers, I know this may be hard, but we need to discuss the time of grandmother's death. How did you find out that your grandmother had died?
Well, Drew Mars came pounding on my door early in the morning. They said that she wasn't moving, that she was still. I remember running to her room. She'd been so happy and healthy before. I ran and she was just motionless. I tried to find a pulse and I couldn't find one. I immediately called 911.
Now, Miss Rogers, the night of August 10th, were you with Agatha?
Yes, I was. We were watching Gone with the Wind earlier. And around 9:30, I left her in the study for the night. That was the last time I saw her alive.
Did you see Drew Mars on the night of August 14th?
Yes, I saw Drew Mars.
Around what time did you see him?
Around 9:35, right after I had left.
Where did you see Mr. Mars?
I saw Mars tiptoeing across the hall from his room to Nana's room.
Tiptoeing? Could you explain that?
Yes, they were walking lightly and holding their hands with their fingers closed, kind of like a fist, like they were holding something.
Where were you when you saw this, Ms. Rogers?
I was down the stairs a bit, looking up at the second floor when I saw Mars cross from their room over to Nana's room.
Did you see Drew Mars do anything else that night?
No, I didn't.
Now, Ms. Rogers, did you leave the house at all on August 14th?
No, I didn't. I was playing with the lady and reading for most of the day.
Did you see anyone other than Drew Mars and Agatha Lee enter the house on that day?
No, it was just the three of us.
Miss Rogers, did you yourself go into Agatha's bedroom during that day?
No, I didn't go into her bedroom at all.
Did you see anyone else go towards Miss Lee's bedroom that night before she went to bed?
Only Drew Mars.
Thank you. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Sure. Go ahead when you're ready.
Good morning, Ms. Rogers. My name is Raul Garcia, and I'm here to ask you some questions.
All right.
I want to begin by talking about why you're here. Now, from 2008 until 2018, you didn't have a full-time job, is that right?
Well, I was traveling a lot, so I had a lot of odd jobs.
But that's a yes to my question. You didn't have a full-time job, right?
No, I didn't have a full-time job.
You were living off of a trust fund, is that right?
For the most part, but I also had books that I was writing, and I also was coming up with different ways that I could make some money.
Well, I want to talk about that trust fund that you had. When you accessed that trust fund in 2018, or excuse me, in 2008, you started off with $2 million. Isn't that true?
That's what my parents left me, yes.
But by the time 2018 rolled around, your money began to run out. Isn't that true?
That's about true. Therapy was really expensive.
In fact, by 2018, your $2 million had gone down to just 12,000. Isn't that true?
That sounds about right. Like I said, rehab and a lot of the medical care that I was needing was very expensive.
But you knew your grandmother. She had money, right?
I guess.
Well,
That's true.
You knew that she had written a will, right?
Yes, I knew she had written a will.
Well, I want to talk about what's on that will. Mr. Cooper, could we please get Exhibit 4 up on the screen? Miss Rogers, you recognize that, don't you?
Yeah, that's my Nana's house.
Now, just to be clear, if your name was on that will, you would get that house, right?
That's about right.
On top of that house, you'd get her car, right?
I don't believe so. I think Drew Mars had their own car, but if Nana did have a car, then I'm pretty sure I would get it.
Well, not only that, you would also get $20 million in cash. Isn't that true?
That is true.
Mr. Cooper, if we could please take that down. And now, in 2018, well, that's when you found out that you weren't going to be on her will, right?
Yes, in a letter that she sent me.
She told you in February that she was going to take you out of it, right?
That's correct.
And so what you did is you hired a private investigator to find her. Isn't that true?
That's true. There wasn't a return address, and I was trying to respect her privacy. I would do anything to find my Nana.
Well, you paid that private investigator $10,000 to find her, right?
Like I said, I would do anything to find my Nana.
So that means that by the time you arrived to her house, well, your $12,000 had gone down to just $2,000. Isn't that true?
I mean, the math checks out, so yeah, I guess that's true.
But you knew there were still ways that you could inherit your grandmother's money, right?
Well, not at that point. At that point, Drew had complete control of the will. At that point, I just wanted to take care of my grandmother right like she was and try to find other ways to help around.
Well, Miss Rogers, you are aware that at that point, Miss Lee, she could have changed her will, right?
I mean, she could have, but since she passed on August 14th, she never got the chance to.
Well, Miss Rogers, right now I'm talking about July 4th when you had just arrived to her home. When you arrived to her home, well, she could have still changed her will then, right?
I mean, she could have, but that's true.
But just to be clear, before that, you hadn't visited her in 7 years, hadn't you?
It's a horrible excuse, I know. I was dealing with my parents' death and I feel so sorry about it now.
I understand, Ms. Rogers, but the question that I asked you is that you hadn't visited her for 7 years. Is that a yes?
That is unfortunately a yes.
You hadn't written to her, right?
That's true.
In fact, in those 7 years, you had only called her once. Isn't that true?
To wish her a happy birthday on her 80th.
But that's a yes to my question. You've only called her once in 7 years.
That's true.
But you knew that there were other ways that you could inherit Miss Lee's money, didn't you?
I beg your pardon? I don't think that's right.
Well, Miss Rogers, you had in fact learned about something called the Slayer Statute. Is that right?
I mean, I know what the Slayer Statute is, but that would require my Nana being dead, and I wouldn't want that. No one would want that.
Miss Rogers, the question that I asked you is if whether or not you knew that that rule existed. Did you know that the Slayer Statute existed before your grandmother's death?
I knew it existed, but why would I ever want to use that?
You believe, from your understanding of that rule, is that if Drew Mars was found to have killed your grandmother, you could sue him for everything. That's what the rule says?
The rule says, if I'm correct, and I'm no lawyer, that if somebody was in the will and they killed my Nana, that they wouldn't get the inheritance. Whether I sue them or not doesn't really matter. It's whether they killed her or not that they get the money or not.
Well, your understanding, just to be clear, was that if Drew Mars, like you said, was found to have killed your grandmother, they would no longer inherit anything, right?
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Yes.
I'm just trying to clarify for the members of the jury. The last answer was kind of convoluted. I'm just trying to clarify it and simplify it for the jury.
I'll give you one stab at it, but let's move along after this, okay?
Sure. Well, Ms. Rogers, I want to talk about what you stand to gain in this trial. It's your understanding that if Drew Mars is found liable for her death, you would get everything. Is that a yes or a no?
I mean, not necessarily. It just means that Drew would get nothing. Why would I want somebody who I think killed my grandmother get her inheritance? That doesn't seem right.
Ms. Rogers, I'm just asking about your understanding. It's your understanding that if you win this trial, you get everything in her will. Yes or no?
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered. Ms. Rogers was explaining her understanding.
Your
Mr.
Honor,
Garza?
I'm rephrasing my question to no longer talk about the rule, but to talk about her understanding as to the outcome of this case. I'm asking as to her understanding. I'm trying to clarify it. This witness hasn't given me a yes or a no, and that's what I'm trying to do here. This is cross-examination.
Okay, I'm going to overrule the objection.
Ms. Rogers, I just need a yes or a no. It's your understanding that if you win this trial, you get everything in Ms. Lee's will. Is that your understanding?
I suppose so.
So then let's talk about the circumstances of Ms. Lee's death. Her body was found on August 15th, correct?
That's right.
You're aware that she had died of a drug or an allergic reaction to a drug called chloroandramine. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Ms. Rogers, you knew where you could buy that drug, didn't you?
Not particularly. I knew Mars told me that I could get it at a pharmacy, but I don't know how widely available it is.
Well, just
I've
like
never
you
bought
told-
it.
Well, just like you told us, you knew that you could buy it at a pharmacy, right?
Right, because Drew Mars told me.
And you knew, or you also had access to Miss Lee's room on August 14th. Is that right?
I mean, I guess I did, but I was in the study, and like I said earlier, I was playing with Lady downstairs.
But that's a yes to my question, Miss Rogers. You had access to her room that day?
I suppose I wouldn't know.
Now,
I
when
didn't
they
go
found
into her room that day.
Miss Rogers, when they found her body, the first thing you did is you told the police to run a toxicology screen. Is that right?
That's right, because she was happy and really healthy the day before. I knew it wasn't from some natural cause.
Miss Rogers, you would agree with me that the only reason you wanted the police to run a toxicology screen was to prove that Drew Mars had done it. Is that a yes or a no?
No, I didn't know what Drew had did, or I didn't know if Drew had a part of it, but I knew she did not die from natural causes. I
Miss
knew something else was up. I just didn't know what yet.
Miss Rogers, I'd like to talk about what that autopsy showed. The medical examiner found out that she had died from ingesting 2 chloroandramine pills. Is that right?
I believe that's what the talks show, yes.
You knew that Miss Lee had an allergy to chloroandramine, didn't you?
I did know that. Again, because Drew told me that.
And Miss Rogers, when your grandmother died, the first and only person that you accused is the person on her will. Isn't that true?
That's right.
And within days, Drew Mars was arrested. Isn't that true?
That's true. And charged for my grandma's murder.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have nothing further.
All right.
No
Do we have any
redirect.
redirect?
No, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff just asked for the witness to step off the stand.
All right, Ms. Rogers, you can return to your seat at the Zoom table. Plaintiff, call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Mr. Bond to the stand. May I proceed?
You can start whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Could you please state your name for the record?
Well, my birth name was Melvin Bend, but I had it legally changed to Maverick Bond. Business, you understand.
What do you do for business?
Well, I'm a world-renowned consulting detective, but the lay people call me a private eye.
Could you tell the members of the jury what a private eye does?
Well, we do what is asked of us. A missing child, your partner having an affair. These types of cases are my bread and butter.
Did your work as a private eye lead to your involvement in this case?
Yes, it did. My services were requested by Stevie Rogers the morning of August 15th of 2018 to investigate the death of their grandmother, Agatha Lee.
After you were contacted by Miss Rogers, what was your next step?
Well, I drove to meet Miss Rogers at Agatha Lee's home, a place called Lee Manor, and I arrived there punctually at 9:25 a.m.
When you arrived at Lee Manor, did you find anyone inside?
I did. Upon my entrance, I went to the master bedroom of the household, where I met Stevie Rogers, Drew Mars, and one unfortunately dead Agatha Lee.
When you arrived, where did you find Miss Agatha Lee?
Well, she was still laying in her bed under the covers. It appeared to me that she had died in her sleep.
To your knowledge, who is Miss Rogers to Agatha Lee?
Miss Rogers is Agatha Lee's granddaughter by blood.
And how about the defendant, Drew Mars?
Well, it's my understanding that Drew Mars was Agatha Lee's in-home caretaker.
Now, while you were at Lee Manor on the 15th, did you see anybody else come?
That's correct, I did. 5 minutes after I arrived, I met Detective Nora Kahn from the Midlands Police Department. And when she arrived, I escorted her to Agatha Lee's bedroom, where the body still lay.
When you went into that bedroom, Mr. Bond, did any of the objects in that room stand out to you?
The only object of note was a pill organizer on the nightstand beside Agatha Lee's bed. I caught my attention because of how colorful it was. It was a standard weekly pill organizer, but once I saw it, I thought it might have something to do with her death because as a private detective, every eventuality is a possibility.
Do you recall having seen any pills in that organizer?
Yes, I did. It was a weekly pill organizer with one container for each day of the week. It was a Wednesday, so the pills from Wednesday to Saturday were still full, while Sunday through Tuesday were empty. There was 4 pills in each of the compartments.
Now, you mentioned a few moments ago that you wondered if those pills could have had something to do with Miss Lee's death. Do you have knowledge of what caused Miss Lee's death?
I do, and it turns out my hunch was correct. The medical examiner concluded that Agatha Lee died from ingesting 500 milligrams or 2 pills worth of a drug called chloroandramine, which is an over-the-counter heartburn medication. However, I know that Agatha Lee was not prescribed chloroandramine.
How do you know that Agatha Lee wasn't prescribed chloroandramine?
Well, I know this because of her caretaker, Drew Mars. They informed me that Agatha Lee had a terrible allergy to chloroandramine. In fact, to use Drew Mars's words, that allergy was terribly, potentially fatal.
So you said that chloroandramine caused Agatha's death. Did you ever find any chloroandramine in Miss Lee's home?
Yes, and in only one place. And during my search of Lee Manor, assisted by Detective Kahn, we came across a black hardcover case, similar to a laptop case, inside of Drew Mars's closet. And inside of that hardcover bag, we found a bottle of chloroandramine pills.
Would you recognize a photograph of that bag that you found in the defendant's closet?
I believe I would.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff is going to put Exhibit 15 on screen constructively outside the eyes of the jury for now.
Okay.
Mr. Bond, do you recognize this photograph?
I do.
What is it?
Well, it is a photograph of the black hardcover bag I mentioned, and the photograph was taken by Detective Kahn at Lee Manor that day.
How do you know this photograph is of the same bag?
Well, if you look at the bag itself, in the, we'll call it the upper left quadrant of the bag, you can see a little white mark. That's actually a pull in the fabric, and I distinctly remembered it when I pulled it out of the wardrobe.
Does the photo appear to have been altered in any way?
Nope, it looks exactly the way that Nora Kahn took the photo.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff offers Exhibit 15 into evidence as a full exhibit.
No objections, Your Honor.
15 is in evidence.
While you were with Detective Kahn on the 15th, did she conduct any tests on this bag, like DNA or fingerprint?
Yes, she did. Detective Nora Kahn was well versed with fingerprint analysis testing, and she tested the hardcover case itself, as well as the contents of the bag for fingerprints.
Do you have any knowledge of what the results of those tests were?
I do. Detective Kahn was able to find multiple fingerprints on and inside of the bag and its contents. However, the only fingerprint that created a conclusive match was on the zipper of the bag, and that fingerprint matched Drew Mars.
What items were found inside this bag?
Inside of the bag, we found a pack of cigarettes, but more importantly, a bottle of pills.
Would you recognize a photograph of the bottle of pills if I showed it to you?
I would.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff's going to switch and put Exhibit 17 on the screen. And there it is. Do you recognize this photograph?
I do.
What is it?
Well, it is a photograph of that same pill bottle that Detective Kahn and I found inside of the black hardcover bag in Drew Mars's closet.
How do you know this is the same pill bottle, Mr. Bond?
Well, if you look at the pill bottle, there are still 17 pills visible, and it was nondescript with no labels, which was unusual for most prescription medications. And it also has the same blue background that Detective Kahn used as a backdrop for this photo.
Does the photo appear to have been altered in any way?
Not at all.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff offers Exhibit 17 into evidence as a full exhibit.
No objections.
17 is in.
Do you know what kind of pills were in this bottle?
Not at our time of discovering them, but after a toxicology test, the pills tested positive for chlorandramine, the same substance that led to Miss Agatha Lee's death.
Did you find chlorandramine anywhere else in Lee Manor other than in the defendant's room?
No, I did not. As I said, chlorandramine is what killed Agatha Lee, and the only place that we found it was in Drew Mars's closet.
Your Honor, we're going to take Exhibit 17 off the screen. Mr. Bond, moving back to that pill organizer that you spoke of before, do you have any knowledge of what medications were actually supposed to be in that organizer?
I do. Again, Drew Mars informed me that they filled Agatha's pill container each week on Saturday after she had taken her last pills. Now, Drew Mars informed me that Agatha took a vitamin B pill supplement along with an aspirin pill and 2 arthritis pills that go by the brand name Winterin.
Have you ever seen those Winterin pills before?
I have. In fact, there was a bottle of those Winterin pills in Agatha Lee's bathroom adjacent to her master bedroom in Lee Manor.
Could you compare for the members of the jury the Winterin pills that Miss Lee was supposed to be taking with the chlorandramine pills that you found in the defendant's closet?
I can, and in one word, identical. They have the same size, the same shape, the same off purple color, and both pills are also odorless and tasteless.
So, if I understand your testimony correctly, the Winterin pills that Agatha was supposed to take had identical properties.
Objection, Your Honor, to attorney testifying.
Why don't you reword that, Mr. Colin? Why don't you reword it? I can't see your last name, unfortunately. But
Mac
reword
Dougal,
that
that's
question.
all right, Your Honor. Sure. So, Mr. Bond, are you saying that the Winterin pills look the same to an observer as the chlorandramine pills?
Unless you're a trained pharmacist, I wasn't able to tell the difference myself. Yes, they look very similar.
Thank you. No further no further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Okay. Cross?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Bond, you said early on in your direct examination, we do what is asked of us when describing your profession, right?
Of course, my clients come to me with requests, and I fulfill those requests to the best of my ability. Investigating is what I do best.
Well, I want to talk about what the plaintiff asked you to do. Now, August the 15th wasn't actually the first time you had made contact with her. Isn't that right?
Oh, that's correct.
She put you on her payroll months earlier.
Objection, Your Honor, to relevance.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yeah, what's the relevance?
Yes, Your Honor. I'm simply going through the fact that Mr. Bond has actually done investigative work for the plaintiff before the August 15th of 2018. She had actually hired him to find her grandmother earlier in the year. So I'm just questioning this witness to go towards any bias he might have.
Okay. Objection overruled.
Now, Mr. Bond, you had actually done some work for the plaintiff before August 15th, right?
That is correct. On one occasion in June of that same year.
Right. The plaintiff wanted you to find Agatha Lee's address and give it to her, right?
That is correct. As I understood it, Stevie Rogers was the granddaughter of Agatha Lee, and they were unaware of her whereabouts and asked me to hunt down their missing grandmother.
Exactly. She wanted you to hunt down her missing grandmother, and she paid you $10,000 to do that, right?
$10,000 is actually lower than my standard going rate. It was a trivial affair, but I'm sure you've seen most of my other cases in the newspapers, and quite frankly, those cost a little bit more.
So, Mr. Bond, you're telling the members of the jury you made a financial exception for the plaintiff in today's case?
It was trivial. I'm sure you've read that it only took me less than 2 days.
All right, Mr. Bond. Well, in that initial communication, the plaintiff sent you a letter from Miss Lee, true?
That when they first explained their situation to me, they showed me this letter. That's correct.
And Mr. Bond, you'd recognize this if I were to show it to you today?
I'm sure I would.
Mr. Garcia, if we could get Exhibit 10 on the screen, please. Mr. Bond, this is that letter you were sent, true?
I believe that's correct. That's the letter that Stevie Rogers showed me.
It hasn't been changed or altered in any way?
To the best of my knowledge, no.
At this time, defense offers Exhibit 10 into evidence.
Objection, Your Honor, on the grounds of hearsay.
May I
Okay.
respond?
Sure, Mr. Cooper.
Your Honor, if I might proffer the actual, I'm only going to use one sentence from this document. If I may proffer what that'll be.
Sure.
The statement we're going to elicit is actually a statement of intent and falls under hearsay exception 8033, as the statement will be, just as soon as I send this letter, I'm going to sign a new will, leaving everything to Drew.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Mhm.
The plaintiff does agree that that would fall under 8033. We would ask, Your Honor, for a redaction to the rest of the document.
Okay. The rest of the document will be considered constructively redacted, if that's okay with Mr. Cooper. And
Yes,
just
Your Honor.
the statement that you're using will be shown to the jury.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Mr. Garcia, could you please zoom in on that fourth paragraph? Now, Mr. Bond, you know that in this letter, Miss Lee mentioned that she was going to be writing a new will, correct?
Apart from the redactions, that's the best I'm able to make out. That's correct.
And she would be leaving everything to Drew Mars, right?
That's what the unredacted part says. That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Now, sir, just 5 weeks after you tracked down Miss Lee, she was murdered, right?
That appears to be the case. That's why I took up the second case.
So let's talk about exactly what you know about her death. She was killed with chloroandramine pills, right?
That's what the autopsy and medical examiner stated. That's correct.
And it was Mr. Mars who actually informed you about Miss Lee's chloroandramine allergy, right?
That's correct.
You didn't have to go digging into any medical records to find that?
I didn't have to. They offered it to me willingly.
Right. You also spoke with the plaintiff on August 15th, true?
That is correct.
Now, opposed to Mr. Mars, the plaintiff was actually very confident about how Miss Lee died, wasn't she?
That's correct, and that's why I questioned her further. I was skeptical, but then the facts she presented me were substantial enough.
Now, the plaintiff even had a suggestion on how to proceed in your investigation, didn't she?
That's correct, but like I said, I questioned her intensity on her accusations and then did my own research afterwards.
Okay, Mr. Bond. Well, that suggestion was that she specifically requested you run a toxicology screen on Miss Lee, right?
Well, that's correct, and quite frankly, I would have concurred with her. The pill bottle right next to her bed table and the fact that she had passed away in her sleep, it creates a likely supposition.
Okay. Now, talking about who was in Miss Lee's house, you know that Mr. Mars wasn't the only one that lived in that house with her, right?
It was my understanding that at the time of Agatha Lee's death, the three inhabitants of the house were Agatha Lee, Drew Mars, and Stevie Rogers. That's correct.
Yes, sir. And you know that the plaintiff was actually alone in that house on August 14th, true?
To an extent, yes, but I don't know the particulars.
You don't know the particulars of the plaintiff's whereabouts on August 14th?
On August 14th, I know that they were at Lee Manor, but I don't know if there are other movements.
Okay, Mr. Bond. Now, about Miss Lee's pills, she kept those on her bedside table, right?
The weekly planner was on the bedside
Objection, Your
table. That's
Honor,
correct.
to speculation. May I be heard?
Yes.
Although the witness could testify to where the pill container was when they saw it, they cannot testify to where it would always be kept or what the regular habit of Miss Lee would be.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, this is cross-examination. If the witness doesn't know whether or not the pills were kept on the bedside table, he's free to answer if he doesn't know that or not. This is not asking him to speculate.
Anything else, Mr. McDougall?
We stand by our objection, Your Honor, that this witness can only testify to what they personally observed.
Okay, I'm going to give Mr. Cooper some latitude on cross-examination. So overruled for now.
Now, Mr. Bond, you know that Miss Lee kept her pills on the bedside table, right?
As far as I know, that's where the weekly planner was found. However, larger volumes of each of those medicines inside of the planner were found in the bathroom of Agatha Lee's bathroom.
And Mr. Bond, you said you found Mr. Mars's fingerprints on some of the medication Miss Lee was supposed to take, Winterin, right?
That's correct. As far as I'm aware, Drew Mars was the one who handled the medications of Agatha Lee.
Yes, Mr. Bond. Now, I'd like to talk to you about that bag you mentioned on direct examination.
The black
First-
hardcover case?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Mr. Bond, first, you actually know it's easy to sneak into Mr. Mars's room, right?
Well, I don't know what you would consider easy.
Well, sir, you've actually been in Mr. Mars's room twice. Isn't that true?
Yes, that is correct. I didn't sneak in, but I have been in their room twice. That's correct.
You said you didn't sneak in, but you went in without Mr. Mars's permission, right?
That's correct. I am a private investigator. What we do is private, and I'm lucky enough that in the private sector, we're not restrained by things like warrants and such. It is my job.
So the first time you were in his room was on the August 15th, and the next time you were on there is on August 21st, whenever you did the search with Detective Khan, right?
That is correct.
And while inspecting the room on August 21st, that's when you found that black bag, true?
On August 21st, that is correct.
That's when you found that chloroandramine?
Yes, it was inside of the black hardcover case we found buried inside of the closet.
But sir, whenever you were in the room the week before on the 15th, you didn't find any black bag, did you?
Well, I wasn't doing a preliminary search. I had only come in to observe the surroundings, and that's when I found an email that incriminated Drew Mars on their computer.
Exactly. You said you only came in to do a preliminary search, but you had time to open up Drew Mars's computer and access it, right?
Well, the computer was already open on the password screen, and they didn't have very good internet security, so I was able to get in within 4 tries of using their password.
And to be clear, you're telling us you didn't search Drew Mars's closet at all on August 15th.
Like I said, I wasn't doing a full search. I only went there to investigate what I could while everyone else was speaking with the detective.
So, Mr. Bond, it was only until a week later on August 21st that those chloroandramine pills were found in Mr. Mars's closet, right?
Well, it was the first time that Detective Khan and myself were doing a full search. That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Bond. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Your Honor, no redirect. We would ask the witness be allowed to step down.
Okay. Mr. Bond, you may step down.
Thank you, sir.
And with that, Your Honor, the plaintiff rests their case in chief and would request a brief 5-minute recess if time does permit.
Okay, sounds good. We're going to take a 5-minute break. Judges, remind yourselves that this is being recorded and streamed over YouTube. We're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 10:56 Central Time. So whatever that is for everybody else in Midlands. I know it's a big jurisdiction.
Okay, for students, I'm going to go ahead and put you guys back in your breakout rooms, and I'll give you a 1-minute warning when the break is ending.
We'll give it another minute or two for judges to get in here.
Okay, so I have informed everybody that the break is about to end, so participants should be heading back to the main room now. And then I am going to just go ahead through and confirm that all of the judges have returned. So I can see you, Paul. I've gotten a message from Harry Tillis. Is Chance Stirrup here? Please briefly unmute yourself and let me know that you're here.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. I got a message from McKenna Hunter. Kyle, you sent me a message? Okay. Tommy Peppard.
I'm here.
Okay. Awesome. And who else am I missing? David Druring, are you here?
I'm here.
Okay. Awesome. We got Chance. So I think that is everybody. Everyone's returned. You guys can go ahead and get started.
All right, judges, just remind yourself to score as you go. I just filled in my ballot as we've been going. So with that, let's get defense chief, case in chief going. Defense, call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Ryan Cabrera to the stand.
All right, Ryan Cabrera.
Good morning, Mr. Cabrera. Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Good morning. My name is Ryan Cabrera.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a writer, a biographer.
Have you written anything we might have heard of? Sir, can you hear me okay? Is the connection all right?
Yeah, the connection is fine. It's just, look, my audience is mostly children. According to Midland's Middle School Gazette, I have 8 bestsellers.
Well, could you tell us why you're here?
Yes, sir. I met with Agatha Lee the night she died and several weeks before then, too.
Why?
I was working on a biography about her. If I'm being honest, she was the first person who agreed to let me write about her outside my mother's book club.
You said that you met with her for several weeks before she passed. What did the two of you talk about?
Her writing, mostly. But we talked about her personal life too, who her friends were, family, stuff like that.
Now, Mr. Cabrera, I'd like to let the jury hear a little bit more about the people in Miss Lee's life. Did you know somebody named Drew Mars?
Yes, sir, I did.
What did you know about Drew Mars?
Mr. Mars was Miss Lee's caretaker. I'd see him drop her off and pick her up from our meetings. Drew was actually the person who asked me to testify here today, and I agreed.
And does that impact your testimony here at all?
No, sir, absolutely not. To be honest, I didn't know Drew well at all, really. He just said he'd give me some of Agatha's books if I told you what I know.
Mr. Cabrera, to your knowledge, did Miss Lee and Drew Mars get along?
Absolutely. Drew slept there, ate there, spent most of the day with her. They seemed like good friends. And Drew actually was the one who called me to tell me when Miss Lee died.
What did Drew Mars tell you?
He told me that she died in her sleep. He was sobbing through the phone. I couldn't even understand what he was saying half the time.
Sir, I'd like to now hear about Stevie Rogers. Do you know who that is?
Yes, sir, I do.
What do you know about Stevie Rogers?
At first, not much, just that she was the granddaughter. Anytime I would bring up family, Miss Lee would sort of look away and change the subject. The few times she actually opened up about her, it was mostly talk about money.
Was there anything else Miss Lee said about Stevie Rogers?
Not much. I didn't hear about any family vacations, no plans for the future, just talked about money.
Did you personally ever meet Stevie Rogers?
Yes. When I went to Miss Lee's house, I actually saw Stevie there. I was surprised.
Did you ask Miss Lee why she was there?
Yes. When we sat down for our interview, I brought her up. I said, you know, Miss Lee, you always talk about Stevie and money. Why is she here?
What did Miss Lee say?
Miss Lee told me she was worried that Stevie had only come back because she ran out of money.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Response, Your Honor.
Sure.
The statement that Miss Lee felt worried that Stevie had come back just because that they've run out of money is a statement, a hearsay exception, falls under the hearsay exception 8033, a statement talking about the state of mind of the declarant, in this case, worry. Worry is a state of mind, and she's talking about why she felt that way.
May I
Okay.
respond?
Response.
Your Honor, the statement of worried does go to the state of mind. However, the witness's other statements surrounding that in explanation do not go to the state of mind. They are not an emotion. So
Your
I would
Honor,
ask that they be stricken.
Response, Your Honor.
Sure.
The reason why the rest of that statement does fall under 8033 is because it's in connection to her state of mind. It's the reason why her state of mind was the way that it is. It's why she was worried. In fact, the entire statement is, I was worried because of this. Your Honor, that's the state of mind of the person.
Any other response?
I stand by my objection. One statement of worried, that is a state of mind. The explanation is not necessary, and I ask that be stricken.
Okay. I'll sustain the objection to the explanation and allow your hearsay exception to that she was worried to come into the record. Okay. Split the baby.
Sure. Mr. Cabrera, you also told us that you spoke to Miss Lee on the day that she passed. Can you tell us how she was acting that day?
Sure. She was less talkative than she normally was. I'd ask a question and she started to mumble one-word answers. I thought something might be wrong.
Did you ask what?
I did, yeah. I said, Miss Lee, is everything all right? What's wrong?
What did she say?
She kind of looked down for a second, pushed her silverware around, and then she told me that she was worried.
Did you ask her why she was worried?
Yes, sir. She said that she was worried because Stevie had asked her for something that morning.
Objection. Hearsay.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Yeah.
In this case, again, she's again talking about worry, but the statement that Stevie had asked for something is not being offered for the truth. We haven't even heard what that something was. We're just using this to show context as to what Miss Lee's further response is regarding that conversation. Just laying some context as to what the further statement is in relation to.
Okay. Response.
Your Honor, any statement from Agatha Lee is hearsay unless it falls under a hearsay exception.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Sure.
It's also admissible if it's not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted, in which case it's not hearsay. And we're not contesting that that Stevie Rogers did in fact ask for something. It's not disputed that they talked and had a conversation that day. We're just here to get the elicited response after that and giving the jury some context to understand what the following statement is in relation to.
Any other response from the plaintiff?
I stand by my objection. In order to elicit a statement from Agatha Lee, it must fall under a hearsay exception. And I believe that it is being offered for the truth of the matter, because in order to follow up on something, you need to understand its truth.
Okay, I'm going to overrule the objection. I'll overrule the objection.
Mr. Cabrera, did Miss Lee say what she was going to do after she said that Stevie Rogers had asked for something?
Yes, sir. She said she wasn't going to do it. She wasn't going to do whatever it was that Stevie had asked for.
Objection, hearsay.
Your Honor, response to that.
Sure.
The statement, Miss Lee wasn't going to do it. She wasn't going to give Stevie what Stevie wanted. It goes to the declarant's intent or plan, what she intends to do in the future. She's speaking in the future tense. She was not going to do something. She was not going to give Stevie what she wanted. It's a statement of intent, what she intended. Under 8033, that's admissible.
Okay, plaintiff response.
I stand by my objection that it is hearsay because it is one of Agatha Lee's statements. And though it can be interpreted as a plan, we have no context as to what may be happening. So to fall under that exception, there needs to be an actual plan in place, not just a statement of something.
Response, Your Honor.
I don't think that's necessary. You can cross-examine on that context, but we're going to allow it into evidence, overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, Mr. Cabrera, just to be clear, what did Miss Lee say after she said that Stevie Rogers had asked for something?
She said she wasn't going to give Stevie whatever it was that Stevie had asked for.
Thank you. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Okay. Cross.
Yes, Your Honor. Could I have 1 minute?
Sure, that actually works out great. We'll ask the judge's time.
May I proceed?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Cabrera. At least it's afternoon here. I'm going to ask you a few questions.
Sure, it's morning for me, but good afternoon to you.
Oh, good morning to you. Now, just before on direct examination, you mentioned your last meeting with Agatha Lee on August 14th, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And at that meeting, you mentioned that Agatha told you Stevie asked her for something, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Cabrera, you didn't have any context as to what Stevie asked her for, correct?
No, ma'am, I wasn't sure.
You didn't know if Stevie asked her to breakfast that day, correct?
I had absolutely no idea what Stevie had asked for. Miss Lee didn't tell me.
Thank you, Mr. Cabrera. Now, you tried to make another meeting with Agatha Lee on that same week, correct?
Yes, ma'am, for Friday.
Right, Friday, August 17th. But Miss Lee wasn't available.
Correct.
And she wasn't available because she told you she made an appointment with her attorney, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
May I respond?
Mm-hmm.
Your Honor, this falls under hearsay exception 8033, Agatha's intent or plan. She planned to meet her attorney. It was her intention.
Respond to that, Your Honor.
Yes.
The statement doesn't state, I plan to meet with my attorney. The statement is, I had already set up an appointment. It's something that she had already done in the past. Therefore, it can't be about any future actions because it's something that happened before she had even elicited that statement.
Any response?
Yes, Your Honor. Hearsay exception 8033 is a then existing mental, emotional, physical condition. An intent or plan goes to the then existing state or mind. It doesn't matter if it's a plan that was already set in place. This exception goes to any sort of plan that was going to happen. Therefore, Miss Lee was planning to meet with her attorney, and she told Mr. Cabrera, "I'm planning to meet with my attorney. I cannot meet with you." Even though the plan was already in place, doesn't mean it wasn't happening.
Response to that, Your Honor?
Sure, I have a question. Is there any case law that might guide my decision here?
There is not. All we have here with us is the rule of hearsay 801 and 803. Now, the rule explicitly states that the statement itself has to declare that there will be a plan. The statement doesn't say that. It says, I had already done something. I had already set up something. And Your Honor, because it's something that had already happened, it cannot go to any future action, the statement itself. It can be implied that there may be a future plan, but all the statement tells us right now is something she had already done.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Sure.
It's important to refer directly to what the exact hearsay exception says. It's a statement of the declarant's then existing mind, such as motive, intent, or plan. All that says is that the statement has to go to the then existing state of mind of the declarant. Miss Agatha Lee's then existing state of mind was, have a plan to meet with my attorney. I'm going to meet with my attorney. That is an intention. She's intending to meet with her attorney.
Response to that, Your Honor?
What's the exact hearsay phrase or testimony that we're objecting to here? What is the witness going to say?
That's what I wanted to clarify. Opposing counsel said that the statement was, I'm going to meet with my attorney. That's not what the question asked. The statement asked in the question was that she had already set up an appointment to meet with her lawyer. She had already set up an appointment to meet with her attorney. That's what we're objecting to.
Okay.
Your Honor, if I may proffer,
Mm-hmm.
the actual statement that Agatha told Mr. Cabrera was, I can't, I'm meeting with my lawyer on Friday. That was an intention.
Your Honor, that wasn't what was said in the question that was previously asked.
Okay. What is the reason for offering this testimony? What are you offering it for?
I'm offering this testimony to prove that Miss Agatha Lee was meeting with her attorney on August 17th, and Brian Cabrera knew about it.
Okay. I'll overrule the objection, give him a little attitude.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Mr. Cabrera, you are aware that Agatha was meeting with her attorney on August 17th.
Yes, ma'am.
And that meeting was to take place just 3 days after she was killed.
I believe so, yes.
Because you became aware of Agatha's death on August 15th, excuse me.
Yes, ma'am. I believe that was a Wednesday, and they were supposed to meet on Friday. So I guess 2 days?
Thank you, Mr. Cabrera. Now, we need to go back in time just a couple months to April of 2018. You were present for a conversation in April between Agatha and Drew Mars, correct?
I saw a few. Can you clarify a little bit more? Yes, I guess so.
Well, this conversation was when Agatha told Drew that they were the sole heir of Agatha's estate, correct?
Yes, that one. I heard that, yes.
So you were there when Drew Mars learned for sure that they were going to inherit Agatha Lee's estate.
Yes, it seemed like Drew had known that.
Now, you were also present at Agatha's will reading, moving forward to August 20th, correct?
Yes, a few months later, that's when the will reading was.
And at the will reading, the attorney declared that Drew Mars was inheriting Agatha's estate, correct?
Yes.
Now, you notice that Drew Mars acted surprised when they heard this?
Yes, ma'am.
And you were confused by Drew's reaction, isn't that right?
Sure, I was a bit confused.
You were confused because Drew Mars already knew that they were inheriting the estate. Why would they act surprised?
Sure, yeah.
But Mr. Cabrera, you are familiar with the contents of Agatha Lee's estate, right?
I believe so. I mean, just what was read off the will.
Right. When the attorney read the will, you noticed that Drew Mars was inheriting Agatha's entire private library, right?
Yes.
Now, a couple days before, you had learned that Agatha's entire private library is full of unpublished mystery novels written by Miss Lee.
No, ma'am, that's not exactly true.
Mr. Cabrera, you didn't know that Miss Lee's private library had unpublished novels?
Oh, it had some, maybe a dozen, but it wasn't completely filled with them. There were other books there too.
And Mr. Cabrera, you did hear at the will reading that Drew Mars was inheriting all of those unpublished novels, correct?
Yes.
Now, as a writer yourself, you understand that those novels, if published, could make quite a bit of money. Isn't that right?
Objection, Your Honor, asking the witness to speculate.
Your Honor, response?
I think, what was your question?
As a writer yourself, you understand that these novels could make a lot of money if published.
Your
Okay,
Honor,
yeah,
may I be heard? Oh, my
overruled.
apologies. Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Cabrera, would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
As a writer yourself, you do understand that these novels, if published, would make a lot of money?
Maybe they could. I don't really know.
To put it in perspective, the estimated future royalties on just Death in a Bottle alone are $3 million. Isn't that right?
Yes, ma'am. Her first book had about a $3 million revenue. I'm not sure what any other books would have been.
Now, Mr. Cabrera, on direct examination, you said that Drew Mars offered you could have anything from the inheritance. Isn't that right?
Sure. Drew asked me to testify. I said yes. And then Drew said, "Is there anything you might want?" And I said I would love to read some of the books.
Now, you know that if Drew Mars wins today's trial, they get the inheritance, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, asking the witness to speculate, to testify to a legal conclusion.
Response, Your Honor?
Sure.
I'm simply asking to this witness's knowledge if they know that Drew Mars would get the inheritance. They can say no if they don't understand that.
Response, Your Honor.
Mm-hmm.
Opposing counsel didn't ask to this witness's knowledge. Opposing counsel asked if the defendant wins this case, they get the books. That's asking directly for a legal conclusion, what the outcome would be of this trial. This witness is not a lawyer, hasn't been to law school, doesn't know what the outcomes would be of a legal proceeding. They can ask to this witness's knowledge, but the question as phrased did not.
Your Honor,
Okay.
may I respond?
Sure, one more time.
I did ask the witness, you know that if Drew Mars wins this trial, using specifically, you know. Also, I don't agree that this is asking for a legal conclusion. This is asking to the witness's knowledge. Asking for a legal conclusion is a completely different type of question. It's asking to determine an actual legal opinion on something.
Your Honor, respond on those grounds?
I don't think it's necessary. I'm going to overrule the objection. I seem to remember Mr. Cooper and yourself asking plaintiff's witnesses a lot of questions very similar to this. So I'll give the plaintiff the same type of latitude on cross-examination.
Yes, Your
But
Honor.
let's move along after this, okay?
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Cabrera, you do understand that if Drew Mars wins this trial, they inherit that private library, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So if Drew Mars wins this trial, you receive Miss Agatha Lee's unpublished novels, correct?
Potentially. That's what Drew told me. We'll still wait to see if that happens, but hopefully if it goes the other way, I can still get the books.
But Mr. Cabrera, you understand that Drew Mars won't have those books if they lose the trial today, correct?
Maybe. I'm not really sure what happens then.
Mr. Cabrera, you don't know that if this civil trial doesn't end in Drew Mars's favor, they won't receive those books?
I don't think so. I don't really know where they go after that.
Did you submit a chapter of your book for today's trial?
Yes.
Do you remember how you displayed this conversation in the chapter of your book?
I mean, I wrote the book a little bit ago, but I think I'd remember.
Would you like me to refresh your recollection for this answer?
Sure.
Your Honor, may I project Mr. Cabrera's book chapter, which is serving as his affidavit, onto the screen?
Any objection, Mr. Garcia?
So long as it's being used to refresh the witness's memory, we do not.
Okay, you may do that then.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Cabrera, can you see this on
Yes,
the screen? Can I direct your attention to lines 139 to 140?
Yes, ma'am.
Please read silently as I read aloud. If civil trial ends and I am still in possession of Agatha's estate, those books are all yours. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, ma'am. I said that earlier.
So that's what Drew Mars told you in terms of the results of this civil trial?
Yes, ma'am. I'm just not sure what happens if Drew doesn't win. I don't know where the books go then.
Right, but if Drew does win, you understand that those books become yours.
Objection asked and answered.
Yeah, let's move along.
Yes, Your Honor. I have no further at this time.
Brief redirect, Your Honor.
Sure.
Mr. Cabrera, opposing counsel spent a lot of time talking about some books. Just to be clear, do you have any idea if those books are worth any money at all?
No, sir. I haven't actually seen the books in person, just heard about them. I'd like to think they're very good, but I haven't actually read them.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have nothing further.
Okay. I don't think
Laura.
we have any recross, do we? Counsel, plaintiff counsel?
Briefly, Your Honor, sorry, I was muted.
Oh, okay. It's okay.
Mr. Cabrera, isn't it true that you couldn't fathom what the books were worth?
Yeah, I mean, if they were great books, they might be worth a lot. Again, I haven't read them. I don't really know if they were good.
Thank you. Nothing further.
No redirect, Your Honor. We ask that this witness be excused.
Mr. Cabrera, you may be excused. Defense, call your next witness.
Defense calls Drew Mars.
Okay. Mr. Mars?
Good afternoon.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Whenever you're ready.
Please introduce yourself to the members of the jury.
Good afternoon. I'm Drew Mars.
Mr. Mars, I know we've heard a lot about you in today's case, but could you just tell us why you're here today?
I was Ms. Lee's caretaker. When she passed, Ms. Rogers sued me for her estate, saying that I killed her.
Did you?
No, sir. Ms. Lee was everything to me.
How did you meet Miss Lee?
Back in 2008, I got a job with the temp agency. They paired me with her as an assistant caretaker. I remember my first week, I was cleaning, I knocked over a lamp, and I thought I was going to get fired, but she said that she always hated that thing and started laughing. I don't know, I guess something clicked because she hired me full time.
What did that job entail?
I mean, I cleaned the house, I cooked, I made sure everything was working all right. I was sort of like a personal assistant.
What was your relationship like with Miss Lee?
I mean, we were very close, living together for 10 years, every meal, every movie. We were very close, sir.
Sir, I want to start asking you about Miss Lee's death.
Okay.
When did you know she had died?
It was that morning, sir. I went up to her room with a coffee and a bowl of cereal. That was her breakfast, and when I knocked, she didn't answer. So I went in. I found her there, sir.
What did you do?
I tried to wake her up. I thought maybe she was just sleeping. But when I touched her, she was bone cold, sir. Then we called 911.
What did the police do when they arrived?
They searched the house, took me and Ms. Rogers' statements. They said they found that she had died from a reaction to chloroandramine. It's some heartburn medication.
Earlier today, Mr. Mars, we heard that your fingerprints were on some of Miss Lee's medication. Do you know why?
I mean, I can't say for sure, but I did her pill container every week, every Saturday. I would pour the pills out into my hand and then put the extras back. So I'm sure I touched a couple that way.
We've also heard about a black bag. Had you ever seen that bag before?
Never, sir.
Do you know why your fingerprints might have been on the zipper?
I have no idea.
Now, during that week Miss Lee passed away, did anyone else have access to your room?
Well, it was us and Ms. Rogers who were living there, so just her.
Mr. Mars, I'd like to ask you some questions about the day Miss Lee died, August the 14th. Were you home the whole day?
No, Ms. Lee had a meeting. I was her driver too, so I drove her there and waited for her to get finished up.
When you and Miss Lee left for that meeting, was anyone else in the house?
Just Ms. Rogers.
How long was it until you saw the plaintiff again?
I mean, until we got back, it was pretty long. She was meeting with her biographer, so I'd say, probably around 2.5 hours, maybe 12:31.
Before you left, did you lock the door to your room?
I don't have a lock on my room, sir.
Did you lock the door to your closet?
Again, no.
What about the door to Miss Lee's room?
Ms. Lee's room was unlocked. She never locked it.
Mr.
Objection,
Mars,
Your Honor, to speculation.
Response, Mr. Cooper.
Yes, Your Honor. If Mr. Mars was the caretaker of that house, it's perfectly within his rationally based perception to know if Miss Lee's door was locked or not.
Response.
Yes, Your Honor. The witness can testify to whether or not they had previous encounters with the door being locked or unlocked, but they cannot testify that at that particular moment the door was unlocked. That's not a rationally based perception.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Mars was there on the day of August the 14th. He can certainly tell us whether or not the door was or wasn't locked using his own perception of that day.
Your Honor, one more response.
I'll give you one more.
Unless the witness is going to testify that before they left the house, they tested the handle, there's no way to know if a door is locked just by looking at it. That's not a rationally based perception within 701A.
Okay. I'm going to overrule it. You can cross-examine him on it if you think it's something that the jury needs to have clarified, but I'll overrule the objection for now.
Now, Mr. Mars, I'd like to be clear. Was any part of that house locked to your knowledge?
No, I mean, we didn't even lock the front door when Stevie was around.
I want to talk a little bit more about the plaintiff now.
Okay.
You said it was just you and Miss Lee until 2018. When did that change?
July of that year, that's when Stevie came.
Before that July, are you aware of any communication from the plaintiff to Miss Lee?
Not for years, sir. I mean, I handled the mail. I never saw any letters, heard any phone calls, nothing like that.
Did you ever talk with Miss Lee about her grandchild?
Just, she didn't like to talk about it that much, but we talked about it once that February.
What did she say?
She said that,
Objection, Your Honor, to the hearsay. This question calls for hearsay on the part of Agatha Lee.
Okay, before we get there, Mr. Cooper, outside the presence of the jury constructively, what's this witness going to say?
Yes, Your Honor. The statement is, she told me she was taking Miss Rogers out of her will, which is an exception to hearsay under Rule 8033.
All right, are you still objecting, Mr. McDougall? Now that we
As
know what
long
the
as that is
witness
the
gonna say?
only statement that will be elicited, we are not.
Okay.
Yes, Your Honor. That will be the only statement.
Good deal. Then we don't have a problem then.
Mr. Mars, what did Miss Lee say?
She said she was gonna take Ms. Rogers out of her will.
Do you know if she did?
Yeah, she showed me the new one. She changed it over from Ms. Rogers to me.
During the 5 weeks Miss Rogers was at the house before Miss Lee died, did you ever hear her talk about it?
I did, sir.
I want to go over exactly what you heard. Where did you hear them speaking?
They were talking in Ms. Lee's study. I had come up to bring some afternoon tea, and I was waiting in the sitting room right outside.
What did you hear the plaintiff say?
Stevie said, I know you took me out of the will, and he said that he wanted her to put her back in.
How did Miss Lee respond?
She said no. She said she didn't like what the money had done to him. She wasn't going to do it.
Mr. Mars, when exactly did this conversation take place?
August 14th, sir. The day she died.
Thank you, Mr. Mars. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Okay. Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Mars, is it morning there for you or afternoon there for you?
It's just about noon, sir.
All right, well then, happy just about noon. I'd like to start with your background with Miss Lee.
Okay.
You started working for Agatha Lee in February of 2008, correct?
Yeah.
You became her sole caretaker in 2009, right?
Yes, sir.
As her sole caretaker, it was your responsibility to fill her pill organizer each week, correct?
Yes, sir.
Aside from that, it was also your responsibility to check on her general health, right?
Yeah, just, take care of her, make sure she was feeling all right.
You would check her blood pressure,
Yes.
but you would also do things like cook for her.
Yes, like I talked about, I was kind of like an assistant too.
You did so much for her that she actually asked you to move in with her, right?
Well, she had a live-in caretaker before. When they left, I took over that job. So it wasn't special to me, but yeah.
Now, once you moved in with her, you would agree with me that the two of you became friendly, right?
Yeah, I mean, we lived together. We were very close, sir.
And you'd watch movies with Miss Lee, right?
Yes, sir.
You'd sit and have long talks with Miss Lee, right?
Yeah, although, we love to read together. That was our favorite thing.
That's right. You'd read and play board games together, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, you became so friendly that in February of 2008, she actually showed you a will that left you to inherit everything she had, right?
2018, but yes, sir.
My apologies. 2018 was when that happened, right?
Yes.
Now, you understood that will to mean that you would get everything Agatha had when she passed.
Yes, sir.
You estimated at that time that was going to leave you with $20 million. Isn't that right?
That's what she told me.
The $20 million is a far way away from the $20,000 that you had in your savings at the time, correct?
Yes, sir. That's a lot more money than I've ever, been aware of.
Let's fast forward a few months from February then. On July 4th, of 2018, Miss Stevie Rogers showed up at Lee Manor, right?
Yes.
Now, at first, Miss Rogers or Miss Agatha Lee kept Miss Rogers distant, right?
A little bit, but, she was happy to have Stevie home.
That's right. Within a few days, you noticed that Miss Lee had actually embraced Miss Rogers back into her life. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, I mean, she was friendly.
You noticed that Miss Agatha Lee started watching movies with Miss Rogers, just the two of them.
Yes, sir.
Eating meals, just the two of them.
Yes, sir.
sitting down and laughing together, just the two of them,
Yes, sir.
playing board games like backgammon, just like you used to with her.
Well, I mean, I still did. I just gave them space if they wanted to, hang out just them two.
You would agree that when Miss Rogers came into Miss Agatha Lee's life again, that was the happiest you had seen Miss Lee in over a decade.
Yes, sir. Just about 9 or 10 years, she was real happy.
Oh, come on, Mr. Mars. As you watched these two get close again, you had to start getting worried she was going to change that will.
No, sir. I wasn't worried about anything like that.
You weren't? I mean, wouldn't you actually, in fact, say you were afraid Stevie was trying to get the money? Wouldn't you agree to that?
I was afraid Stevie was going to hurt her. Yeah, I thought she was just back for the money, but I wasn't worried about my will situation.
But that is a yes, that you were worried or afraid that Stevie was trying to get that money.
I was afraid he was trying to hurt her, sir. I didn't care about the money.
But you did stand to lose $20 million if she took you out of her will, correct?
I mean, when that happened and she passed away, yeah.
Now, you had already realized at this point that inheriting that money was quite literally going to change your life, correct?
Of course, sir.
I mean, it's true that you actually needed that money to send to your family to pay for medical bills, right?
At first, yeah.
You had a sick sibling at home, right?
In February, yeah.
And then on August 14th, you overheard a conversation in the study that you testified to today, correct?
Yes.
Now, you overheard that conversation when you were coming to bring Agatha and Miss Rogers some tea.
Yes, sir.
Now, you claimed on the stand that you heard Stevie ask Miss Agatha if she would change that will, right?
Yes, sir.
You also testified that you heard Agatha Lee say she wasn't going to change that will. Is that what you testified to?
Yeah, she was pretty adamant about it.
So, Mr. Mars, you will look the jurors in the face and tell them that Agatha Lee did not say she was going to call her lawyer and put Miss Rogers back in that will.
Sir, I can't quite see them the way we're set up, but I'll look straight in the camera if you'd like.
So you would, looking straight into the camera and trusting that they're watching you, tell them that Miss Lee did not say she was going to call her lawyer and put Miss Rogers back in that will.
Objection, Your Honor, to attorney testifying. Your Honor, Counsel McDougald asked the question before whether or not he overheard the conversation, and simply whether or not Miss Lee said yes or no to the plaintiff's question of would he change his will. Counsel has added into his question, you heard Miss Lee say she was going to call her lawyer. This is not the same conversation. This is not the same thing, and he's adding it into his question improperly.
I'm going to overrule the objection. I gave you a lot of latitude, Mr. Cooper. I'm going to give it the same latitude to him. Okay.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, Mr. Mars, you would deny to the members of the jury that Miss Lee said she was going to call her lawyer and change her will.
Sorry, she said, I didn't hear anything about a lawyer. Stevie said, I want to have me back in that will. And Ms. Lee said, no, I can tell you that for sure.
You can tell me that for sure, but isn't it true that just moments later you drove her to a lunch appointment?
I mean, yeah, that's true.
And during that car ride, you recall that Agatha made exactly one phone call.
Yes, sir.
And you heard Mrs. Lee begin that conversation with, hello, Kirby. Isn't that true?
Yes, sir.
The only Kirby you know just so happens to be Agatha Lee's personal attorney, Kirby Doolittle. Isn't that correct?
Yes, Mr. Doolittle, he handles everything for her.
And after you heard her call Mr. Doolittle, you just had to decide it was time to make a stop to the local pharmacy. Isn't that correct?
No, I mean, I dropped her off, and then I went over and I got a Dr. Pepper from CVS.
So to be clear, in sequence, you heard Miss Lee call her lawyer, Kirby Doolittle, and then after you dropped her off, you made a stop at the pharmacy. Yes?
Yeah, at a CVS, yes.
And you paid cash.
Yeah, I believe so.
And you don't have a receipt.
No, I mean, those things are like a foot long. I don't keep those.
but you claim you didn't buy chloroandramine at that time.
Yes, sir. I mean, I've never bought that drug.
And just to be clear, it was your understanding back then on August 14th that Miss Lee had a potentially fatal allergy to chloroandramine.
Yes, sir. We were very careful about that.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Any redirect?
No, Your Honor. I just asked that Mr. Mars be excused.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Mars, you may be excused. Okay, we're now about to go into closing argument. All right, judges, before we do that, please everyone switch back to speaker view like we did during opening statements. That's in the top right-hand corner, right next to the full screen selection. So I'll give you a second to do that. And then plaintiff closer, Mr. McDougall, is that right?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Thank you. Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. Motive and opportunity. You're here today to decide if it is more likely than not that the defendant, Drew Mars, killed Agatha Lee. And we, the plaintiff, are confident that by the end of your deliberations, you will realize that Drew Mars, the defendant, was the one who had the true motive and opportunity to kill Miss Lee. Now, to prove this, we brought two witnesses. And the first witness was Miss Rogers. You heard that she's the granddaughter of Miss Agatha Lee, and she set the stage for why we're all here today. She testified that back in February of 2018, her grandmother changed her will and replaced Miss Rogers with Miss Agatha Lee's caretaker, the defendant in today's case. Now, Miss Agatha Lee, as you heard, was a famous author, and the defendant themselves admitted that will was going to leave them with over $20 million. But the defendant had a problem that they didn't see coming. The problem was that Miss Rogers was about to come back into Agatha Lee's life. On July 14th of 2018, the plaintiff, Miss Rogers, showed up at Lee Manor looking to rekindle her relationship with her grandmother. You heard the defendant admit that they watched as Miss Lee embraced Miss Rogers back into her life. They started watching movies together. They started playing board games together. They started sitting and having long talks together. And ladies and gentlemen, do not be mistaken. The defendant got worried when they saw this. They started to be afraid that Miss Rogers wanted to get that money. They were afraid they were going to lose that $20 million that they had been accounting for. And then on August 14th, those fears materialized. As the defendant walked down some stairs with some tea in their hand, they overheard a conversation. Now, this conversation was coming from the study room inside Lee Manor, where Miss Agatha Lee was talking with Miss Rogers, the plaintiff. Now, you've heard two different accounts of how this conversation went. The first witness you heard from was Miss Rogers, and she testified that she asked her grandmother to change that will, and that her grandmother agreed to change that will and said she was going to call her lawyer and schedule an appointment for the 17th, just 3 days later. But then you heard a second version. Now, that version was the defendant's story. The defendant denied that Miss Lee made any mention of a lawyer. You just heard that moments ago. She said all she could remember was that Miss Lee said she wasn't going to change the will. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this case comes down to who do you believe more? Was Miss Lee going to change that will or not? Because if she was, then it's the defendant who has the motive to kill her, not Miss Rogers, as the defense has tried to tell you. And ladies and gentlemen, to make that decision, I'd like to remind you of some evidence you've heard today. What you heard was that just moments after that conversation with Miss Rogers, Agatha Lee got in the car and made one phone call. Now, that phone call was to somebody named Kirby Doolittle. And do you know who the only Kirby Doolittle that the defendant knows is? Just so happens to be Agatha's personal attorney. And then you heard before that even, you heard Rain Cabrera take the stand and testify that Agatha Lee had told them they were planning to meet with their attorney on the 17th. Ladies and gentlemen, Agatha Lee was planning to meet with her attorney because she was planning to change that will, just like Miss Rogers said. And you know who else knows that? The defendant, ladies and gentlemen. That's why just after they dropped Miss Lee off at her lunch appointment, seconds after hearing this phone call, their next stop was to a local pharmacy. They claim they don't remember what they bought. They paid cash and receipts are too long to keep. But we know what they bought at that pharmacy because we found it inside Lee Manor. You heard Mr. Bond take the stand and testify that they heard that that they actually found chloroandramine inside the closet in the defendant's room in a black bag. This was the opportunity that the defendant needed to kill Miss Agatha Lee, because I just asked her and you heard it. The defendant knew that Agatha Lee had a potentially fatal allergy to chloroandramine. Now you've really got to be kind of sure that those pills were actually put in that room by the defendant and not Mr. Rogers, like the defense is trying to say that they were. So again, let me remind you of the only evidence we have to help you make that decision. The only evidence we have is that the defendant's fingerprints were on that black bag, not the fingerprints of Miss Rogers. You see, what happened that day on August 14th is that the defendant got scared that they were going to lose their money that they were already counting on to help their sick sibling. And so they bought that chloroandramine. They brought it back to their room. They took it up the stairs with them to Miss Lee's bedroom, and they put it in that pill organizer. And as you heard from Mr. Bond, there's no way Miss Lee could have told the difference between those Winterin pills and those chloroandramine pills. They were the same shape. They were the same size. They were the same color. What she didn't know was that she was not going to wake up that day. And 12 hours later, Miss Lee was found dead. And now, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it is your job to render a verdict of liable against the defendant, because they were the ones who had the motive and the opportunity to kill Miss Lee. Thank you.
Defense.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. We're here today because the plaintiff wants you to believe that Drew Mars murdered Agatha Lee. You might be asking yourself, why are we here in a civil court? Why are we being sued when a woman is dead? I've asked myself these same questions. Unfortunately, members of the jury, the reason the plaintiff has brought us here today is because of one thing: money. And in the plaintiff's pursuit of money, she's tried to show you that only one person could have been responsible for murdering Agatha Lee. It couldn't have been that multiple people had access to the murder weapon, chloroandramine. It couldn't have been that multiple people had access to Agatha Lee's pill container. It couldn't have been that the plaintiff had a plan to frame Mr. Mars all along. Members of the jury, throughout today's trial, you've heard that all of these things have come to be true. And now at the end of today's case, what you're left with is exactly the same thing my co-counsel told you this morning when describing the plaintiff. She knew what the will said, and she knew how to stop it. Members of the jury, I'd like to spend our time together by first explaining to you what the law is in this case. Then we'll go over the evidence that you heard. And finally, we'll talk about how what we've shown proves that this case for the plaintiff has nothing to do with justice and everything to do with money. Now, the law governing today's case is something called the Slayer Statute. What it tells us is that an individual cannot receive any of the estate from a person who they have murdered. What the plaintiff has to show is that Mr. Mars purposefully or knowingly caused the death of Agatha Lee. They have to prove that to you beyond a preponderance of the evidence. That means you have to be more convinced. You have to be convinced that it was more likely that Mr. Mars killed Agatha Lee over any other possible explanation. But what the statute also tells us is that if the plaintiff meets their burden, Agatha Lee's entire estate would go to the plaintiff. The plaintiff has failed to meet that burden today. So let's go through and talk about what you heard. First, she knew what the will said. The plaintiff called Miss Rogers herself today. You heard about how nicely she spoke about her grandmother today, about how happy she seemed whenever she met her, like they had a great relationship. But members of the jury, remember that for 7 years, the plaintiff had not communicated with her grandmother a single time. It wasn't until 2018 when that $2 million trust fund started getting shorter and shorter until they had only reached around $12,000 that it was time to reach out and talk to her grandmother again. Not only was the trust fund running out, but in February of 2018, she was also sent a letter by her grandmother. That letter you saw today that said, "Just as soon as I send this letter, I'm going to write a new will, leaving everything to Mars." She knew about the will, but not only did she know about it, she knew how to stop it, members of the jury. Because you'll remember on cross-examination, my co-counsel, Mr. Garcia, asked Miss Rogers if she was knowledgeable of the Slayer Statute. We heard that she had actually been to law school, and before she arrived at Lee Manor in July of 2018, before Miss Lee had died, she answered that she knew if somehow Mr. Mars could be framed or blamed for Miss Lee's death, well, the plaintiff would assume the rest of Miss Lee's estate because she was her grandchild. Now, in trying to stop Miss Lee's will from happening, the plaintiff also brought before you today a hired private investigator, Mr. Bond. An investigator that, remember when I asked him on cross-examination, he was paid $10,000 initially earlier in the year to help the plaintiff find her grandmother. And he said that I actually gave her a rate that was cheaper than my standard. He made a financial exception for the plaintiff in today's case to find Miss Lee. We also learned some of the forensic evidence he collected throughout his investigation. He told you about a black bag. He told you first that Drew Mars had access to pills, chloroandramine pills. But remember, so did the plaintiff. Told you that Drew Mars knew about Miss Lee's fatal allergy. So did the plaintiff. And that black bag he told you about. Remember, he actually searched Mr. Mars's room twice. The first time was on August 15th, the day Miss Lee had been found dead in her home. During that time, he told you he didn't commit a thorough search, so he didn't find a bag. But his search was thorough enough to open up Mr. Mars's laptop, to type in a password, to search through his emails, and even talk about one in court today. Now, members of the jury, he didn't find any black bag on August the 15th, but somehow a week later, on August the 21st, that's when they find that black bag. That's when they find that chloroandramine. And the plaintiff wants you to believe that Mr. Mars, if he had been committing a crime, would hold on to the murder weapon the entire week that Miss Lee had died before they officially searched his residence. That just doesn't make sense. Now, Mr. McDougal just got up here and he told you that this case comes down to that conversation that was had in Miss Lee's study. Well, members of the jury, if we really want to weigh who's telling the truth about that conversation, the only person telling you that Miss Lee was going to change her will is the plaintiff. In fact, you have two witnesses corroborating that Miss Lee wasn't going to change her will. Mr. Mars told you himself that Miss Lee had denied the plaintiff's request. You also heard from Ryan Cabrera today. He told you that the plaintiff had asked for something this morning, and Miss Lee had to tell him no. Now, members of the jury, we don't know exactly what that conversation was about, but Miss Lee certainly was referring to this conversation. This is something to get worked up over, something to speak about with your biographer. Now, today's case, members of the jury, leaves us with too many questions and not enough answers. Think about all the things you didn't hear in today's case. We didn't see any evidence conclusively linking Drew Mars to chloroandramine. Now, why didn't we have any fingerprints on the chloroandramine bottle? Why don't we have any video evidence of him purchasing chloroandramine? The only people telling you that that happened is opposing counsel. Now, members of the jury, the answers to these questions, I don't know. They don't know. And now, you don't know. Today, the plaintiff was charged with proving to you that Mr. Mars killed Agatha Lee. They had to show you that he did so knowingly or purposefully. Instead, they've shown you that the plaintiff knew what was in the will and he knew how to stop it. Now, the plaintiff thinks it's okay to take an inheritance away from a rightful recipient just because he was Miss Lee's caretaker. Because of the evidence they brought before you today, that's not reasonable. They want to turn a murderer into a millionaire. And members of the jury, that's not justice in this country. That's not justice in this state. That's not justice in this courtroom. Now, the ultimate responsibility for what happens today doesn't rest with me, and it doesn't rest with the plaintiff either. It rests with you. And the time to do justice in the form of putting someone behind bars for the murder of Agatha Lee is unfortunately already past us. But each and every one of you, members of the jury, have the unique opportunity to do justice in your own way today. And that's by making sure Agatha Lee's final wishes don't go unanswered. Because this case isn't all about money like the plaintiff would have you believe. It's about maintaining the dignity of a slain woman's final will and testament. Do justice today. Find Drew Mars not liable. Thank you.
Okay.
Brief rebuttal, Your Honor.
Sure. Are we constricted by time at all? Are you on the clock?
I am on the clock. Yes, I have 1 minute left. About
Okay.
1:24.
Okay, good deal. Then you can
All right.
start whenever you're ready.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Attorney Cooper just came before you, and he made two very bold statements. Statement one was that multiple people had access to chloroandramine. Statement two, multiple people had access to Miss Lee's Winterin pills. And the reason those were bold statements was because there's absolutely no evidence of their truth. There's absolutely no evidence that Miss Stevie Rogers' fingerprints were on any chloroandramine. There's absolutely no evidence that Miss Stevie Rogers' fingerprints were on any Winterin pills. The only evidence in this case that links someone to chloroandramine is the fingerprints of the defendant on that black bag where the chloroandramine was found. And the only evidence that links anyone in this case to those Winterin pills was the defendant's fingerprints when they were found back in that bottle. Ladies and gentlemen, one person had access to those pills. And that's why it's time for you to enter a judgment of liable. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Bailiff, are you on here?
Yes, yeah, I'm letting Tab know that we have just finished.
Good job, everybody.
So while I think Tab's gonna come in and they're gonna stop the live stream, and then I'm gonna go ahead and put the students into breakout rooms while the judges finish their ballots.
Good deal.